Chapter 4. The Grinder's Test. The foundry district choked the sky with a permanent, greasy twilight of coal smoke and industry. The air, thick with the tang of hot metal and chemical runoff, was a world away from the fragrant peace of her former life. Here, in the city's grimy, beating heart, was the grinder. It wasn't the hidden establishment, it was a brazen declaration of power, housed in a derelict ironworks that loomed like the carcass of a metal beast. The rhythmic, percussive roar of a crowd and the clang of steel on steel spilled from its shattered windows. This was the Ashen Vale's crucible, the place where they forged their weapons from the city's human dross. Alara's goal was simple: to burn so brightly in their fire that they would be forced to notice her. She moved through the throng of onlookers, a ghost in her dark, hooded armor. The crowd was a collection of mercenaries, thugs, and desperate souls, their faces illuminated by the hellish orange glow of the forge fires that still burned around the pit's perimeter. They stank of cheap ale and bloodlust. At a makeshift registration table, a hulking man with a branded face and a ledger that looked as battered as he did grunted at her name. "None of your concern," Alara said, her voice a low rasp. She slid a handful of copper coins across the scarred wood. "I'm here to fight." The man sneered, his gaze raking over her lean frame. "You got a death wish, lady. This ain't a tavern brawl. Last woman who stepped in that pit got carried out in a bucket." Alara met his gaze, letting him see the faint, cold emerald fire in her eyes. "I'll be the one holding the bucket." Something in her voice, a chilling certainty that went beyond simple confidence, made him recoil. He grunted again, but this time it was with a grudging respect. He smeared a line of grease paint on his ledger and waved her through. The pit was a circle of packed earth and dark, rust-colored sand 20 paces across, enclosed by a fence of sharpened iron rebar. The air was electric with violence. As she waited in the wings, she watched a brute with arms like tree trunks cave in his opponent's skull with a mailed fist. The crowd roared its approval. This was her obstacle. Not just the fighters, but the pit itself. It was an altar to brutality, designed to encourage overwhelming, savage force. It tempted the storm within her. The power under her skin surged, a wild beast eager to be unleashed. The memory of her shop, upturning men to dust with a thought, whispered to her. It would be so easy to end these fights before they began, to encase her opponents in flawless jade and shatter them into a million pieces. But she couldn't. A display that overt would bring the wrong kind of attention. Captain Thorne's pained face flashed in her mind. His magical senses were a leash she now had to wear. She had to be a scalpel here, not a cataclysm. She needed to win, but she needed to win with a skill that was just this side of impossible, hinting at a power she never fully revealed. Finally, her turn came. The branded man yelled, "Next up, the challenger with no name versus Grok the Crusher." The crowd jeered as she stepped onto the bloody sand. Her opponent was the brute she'd seen earlier, a slab of muscle and scar tissue who grinned, showing a mouth of broken teeth. He wielded a massive, two-handed hammer that had likely seen service on a smithing forge. The fight began not with a bell, but with Grok's bellowing charge. He was a force of nature, a landslide of flesh and iron. Alara didn't meet him head-on. She was a whisper of motion, sidestepping the devastating swing of the hammer that cracked the earth where she had been standing. She was faster. 5 years of peace hadn't dulled the instincts honed by a lifetime of battle. She flowed around him, a shadow he couldn't pin down. Her desire was to show not just strength, but an untouchable superiority. Grok roared in frustration, swinging his hammer in wide, predictable arcs. Alara let him exhaust himself, her movements economical and precise. Then she saw her opening. As he raised the hammer for another blow, she darted in. Her action was a flicker of controlled magic. She channeled a tiny sliver of her power not into a weapon, but into her own body. A thin, invisible shell of jade-hard force encased her gauntleted fist. She didn't strike his head or chest. She struck the haft of his hammer. The sound was a sharp crack, like a tree limb snapping in a gale. The thick, iron-banded oak splintered, the hammerhead flying off and embedding itself in the far wall of the pit. Roke stared in disbelief at the shattered handle in his hands. The crowd fell silent. It wasn't the strength of the blow that stunned them, but its impossible precision. Before he could process it, Alara moved. Two swift, brutal strikes to the nerve clusters in his shoulder and neck. One more to the back of his knee. The giant collapsed, twitching and spazzing, completely immobilized but very much alive. She stood over him for a single heartbeat, then turned and walked back toward the gate without a word. The silence held for a moment longer, then erupted into a mixture of stunned gasps and a few scattered, knowing cheers from the older criminals in the crowd. They had seen something familiar in her efficient, merciless grace. She fought twice more. Her second opponent was a lithe woman with a poisoned stiletto, unnaturally fast. Alara created a small shimmering disc of jade on her bracer at the last second, blocking the fatal lunge. The stiletto shattered on the impossibly hard surface, and a single precise chop to the wrist disarmed and disabled her. The third was a pair of brothers who fought with coordinated attacks. She turned their own strategy against them, crystallizing a patch of sand under one's feet, sending him careening into his sibling. The fight was over moments later with each victory. The whispers grew louder. They were hushed, fearful and incredulous. She heard fragments of them as she waited for her next opponent. Fights like a phantom. That green flash, you see it? No one's moved like that in years, not since. The Destroyer. The name, her name, spoken in the dark like a curse and a prayer. The legend wasn't as dead as she'd thought. It had only been sleeping. Her result was undeniable. She hadn't just won. She had dominated with an artistry that was more terrifying than brute force. She stood alone in the center of the pit, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, the emerald fire in her eyes now a steady, undeniable glow. She slowly raised her head, ignoring the roaring crowd, and stared directly at the shadowed balcony overlooking the arena, the box reserved for the Vale's leadership. A figure detached itself from the shadows on the balcony and began to descend the crude iron stairs leading to the pit floor. The crowd parted before him, a wave of fear clearing his path. He wore the dark, tattered robes of the Ashendale, his forearms wrapped in the same obsidian bracers as the thugs who had destroyed her life. The sickly purple runes pulsed softly, casting his sharp, cruel face in an unhealthy light. He stopped just outside the iron rebar fence, his eyes, cold, black, and utterly devoid of emotion, fixed on her. "Impressive," the man said, his voice a smooth, dangerous baritone that carried easily over the din. "Brutality is common. That kind of control is a rare commodity." He gave her a smile that was all predator. "The Ashen Veil has a use for a weapon like you." Alara's heart was a cold, heavy stone in her chest. This was it. The path was opening. "We have an opening," the lieutenant continued, his smile widening. "A test of loyalty for a new asset. Come with me. We have much to discuss about the price of your skills." She had hunted them into the dark, and now they were inviting her into their lair. Without a word, she nodded, stepping out of the pit and leaving the whispers and the blood behind. She followed the lieutenant into the deeper shadows of the foundry, the storm within her now a silent, waiting tempest, ready to be unleashed.